Excellent, thank you.
The recording has just started.
Awesome.
Do you know how many people we're expecting today?
I wasn't certain who all is going to show up, but I'm thinking right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, we've got 11 people in total. Yeah.
Yep. That's right. That's great.
Okay. Should we get started, or should we give them should we hold off for a few more minutes just to give people some time to join in?
I would go ahead and we could start with introductions about who's here, so we all know who's here.
That would be very useful.
All right. I'm Philip Voorhees, and I'm here at 10E Campus TBR, Accessibility Specialist / Assistive Technology Specialist. Anyone else want to join us? Wow. Ed?
Can you hear me?
Is that you carrying your coffee?
Well, I'm trying to get back to my office. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, this is Ed Beeson from Tennessee Tech University. I'm the Assistant Director of Disability Service, and I'm working on some of the accessibility initiatives on campus.
Awesome. Rhonda, you want to introduce yourself? Are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can.
Okay, great. I'm Rhonda Gregory. I'm the Director of Distributed Education at Volunteer State Community College, and I am on our accessibility task force, doing a lot of work in that area, trying to train our faculty to create more accessible courses.
Excellent. Thank you, Rhonda.
Mm-hmm.
And Jennifer?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jennifer Knott. I'm Senior Instructional Designer with TNE Campus, and Philip is right over my shoulder.
And
hello, this is
Chaka?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shaka Hollins, and I handle all online programs, hybrid programs as well for the TCAT central office and our 26 TCAT, as well as serve on TBR's Accessibility Initiative Task Force.
Awesome. Thank you, T'Chaka.
Perfect.
Let's see. I think David White was there.
yes, this is David White from Walter State, Assistant Dean for Distance Education and Instructional Design. And with me is Laura Duvall, who is Coordinator of Instructional Design and Accessibility at Walter State.
Thank you, David. And Holly-Anna?
Hi everyone, it's Holly-Anna White, Chattanooga State Instructional Designer, D2L Admin, and we are all working on accessibility like crazy.
Thank you very much, Holly-Anna. Before I introduce our special guest, Nicola, you want to introduce your...
Hi, I'm Nicola Ware. I'm the Director of Instructional Design and Training for TNE Campus here at TBR.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicola, for being here. Let's see. Before I go to our visitor from Georgia, is there anyone that I've missed? No? Okay. Well, that's the case. Christopher, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, well, this is Christopher Lee. I'm the Director and Department Head of AMAC Accessibility, which is an accessibility center tied to the University System of Georgia. We are underneath the Georgia Tech, housed here on campus at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And we work with about 2,300 institutions around the U.S. With me, I'm going to let them introduce. I've got two additional folks from Georgia sitting on this call. Ron, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ron Dutton. I'm the eText production manager here at AMAC.
And hi, I'm Ricardo Garcia, Strategic Development Director here at AMAC.
So we're glad to be a part of this, Philip. Thank you.
Excellent. Nice to meet you. We've actually been trying to schedule a separate demo, so it's good to see you on this call. That works out for the best. Okay, perfect. And then so I'm Nicholas Mathis. I'm the CEO of a small educational technology company called Frontier. Our main office is in Cambridge in the UK, but we also have a presence in the Bay Area, and I'm calling from Berkeley today, so that's where I'm currently based. Okay, so let's get started, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Is it somewhat readable?
I can see it fine.
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So today we'll be talking about Ally, and an Ally is a service that is a product that tries to make course content more accessible, and so in most of the platforms and the systems that we make available to our students and our instructors, when those platforms talk about accessibility, they will mostly focus on the accessibility of the platform itself, and they tend to treat the user-generated content or the actual course content as mostly a black box, and that's kind of the leap that we're trying to make. So we're trying to open up those black boxes and look into the user-generated content and try to make that content more accessible. So that's kind of where Ally sort of has its own little place in the landscape, and so. So before we get started, when we got started with Ally, there's a number of sort of problems that we identified in the area of accessibility of course content, and you'll be very familiar with these problems. So I'll go through them pretty quickly, but just to give a little bit of context. So there's a number of problems that we identified in terms of the institution, a number of problems that we identified in terms of the instructor, and a number of problems that we identified in terms of the student. Oh, and if you have any questions or comments or remarks, feel free to just jump in at any time. That's how I prefer to do these things. So in terms of problems that the institution's faced with, first of all, it tends to be very, very difficult for an institution to get really good insight into how they're doing in terms of the accessibility of their course content, other than the sort of anecdotal evidence or manual checking. And because it's that hard to get really good insight, that makes it harder to identify what to focus on, where training can be provided, what software could be licensed, who to target, and so on. So those things tend to be very difficult and hard to get some really good insight into. And then, so most of the institutions that we talk to, they will have something along the lines of an alternative media lab where students can put in requests for course materials to be made available to them in an alternative accessible formats. That tends, for those of you that have gone through the process of manually remediating course content, you will know that it's a very sort of time intensive and labor or sort of time consuming and labor intensive process, and so they can take and usually these departments are under resourced as well. So it can take a long time for those materials to be turned around and to be made available in the desired alternative format. And obviously, there's some legal requirements around the accessibility of course content as well, which sometimes ends up with institutions being sued, which is an unfortunate and very expensive event. And then, in terms of problems that the instructors face, so based on talking to a large number of instructors, there's a very significant awareness issue there, both in terms of what instructors are expected to do around the accessibility of their course content and what they should be doing, as well as a lack of guidance on how to make some of those changes and how to make some of those improvements and where to find that guidance. So most of the institutions will have, for example, sections of their website dedicated to how can we create more accessible course content. But the thing that sort of is very significant in generating this awareness problem is that tends to be very disconnected from the from the systems that they use to create their course content and the sort of process and workflows they go through to make that course content available to their students. And so that's kind of what's contributing to that sort of awareness problem. And then in terms of problems that the students faced with, so as I said, so most institutions have this sort of this workflow where they have to put an explicit request for things to be made available to them in alternative accessible formats that can take a long time to turn around. And so it can take a long time for them to receive what they requested, which doesn't really work with their course workflow and can end up with them being somewhat frustrated. And one thing that we feel is very, very important here is that that also tends to exclude a number of students, both students that aren't aware of this workflow, as well as students without recognized disabilities. And we actually very strongly believe that there's a lot of small things that can be done in the accessibility of course content that will actually actually have an impact for everyone, that will make the content better for everyone. And that's when accessibility really starts to bleed into into the quality of course materials and really the core business of our institutions. So we definitely don't want it to be excluded from the picture. So that's kind of the background as to where Ally got started and some of the problems that we're trying to resolve or at least improve. And so that's where Ally comes in. And the way in which we envision Ally is not as a separate product or a separate platform that people have to go to, but as something that very closely and very seamlessly integrates into the systems that they're already using. So rather than creating something new that they have to be aware of and go to explicitly, we actually want to bring our accessibility features into the systems that they already use, so that we can create a very consistent accessibility experience across those different systems. So that's kind of how we see ourselves. And the learning management system was a very obvious starting point for us. So the learning management system holds a lot of course content. Students access it very frequently to get to their course content. So our initial target was to, and we're currently executing on the plan to provide an integration with all of the major learning management systems out there. And so we're in a very good place there. We've got an alliance partnership with Instructure. We've got a partnership with Blackboard around Blackboard Learn and Moodle Rooms. And we also have a network partnership with Desire to Learn around Brightspace. So what are most, are you all Canvas schools, or do we have a mix of different LMSs in the house right now?
We're all Desire to Learn, I think.
Oh, everyone's Desire to Learn?
Yeah, USG is with Desire to Learn. About 80 to 90% of our institutions.
I see what you're saying.
Here at TTU, we're Desire to Learn.
I'm going to have to go back out to get back in.
It's all right.
Okay, perfect. So in terms of Desire to Learn, we have a natural partnership with them. The integration with them isn't production ready yet. We'll be taking Desire to Learn pilots in the fall semester, but we currently don't have any yet. We're working with them on building the integration. And then we also don't want to limit ourselves to just the learning management system. I think over time we see ourselves integrating with other types of systems as well. For example, we're already working with the California Digital Library to integrate Ally into their open access platform. I think there's useful integrations that can be done with content collaboration platforms, things like Box or Google Apps, Google Drive. I mean, things like WordPress, things like Drupal. So those are all things that we'll sort of be adding on over as time goes by. So a little bit more about what Ally actually does and how it works. And this is specifically for the learning management system integration. So other integrations with other types of systems would probably look slightly differently, although most of the sort of broad strokes would be very, very similar, I think. So in terms of the learning management system integration, the way in which it works is, so the instructor goes into the LMS, goes into their course site, adds some course content, and so that all uses the sort of native learning management system workflow. We don't change any of that. We don't interrupt it either. So what we're shooting for is very much it's almost an invisible experience where our features are always there when they're available, but when they're needed, when people need them. but they're sort of, they don't get in the way of the usual workflows, or they don't alter those workflows. So the instructor goes in, adds their course content, and at that point Ally will automatically in the background pick up on that, and will do a number of things to it in order to, first of all, automatically create a number of alternative accessible formats. So the first thing that it does is it looks at the content and it'll check what type of content is this. Is this a PDF file? Is it a Word file? Is it a presentation? Is it audio? Is it video? Is it HTML? Is it something else? And then depending on the type of content that it is, it'll first of all run it through an automated accessibility checklist, which will check for common accessibility issues in that type of content. And that can be, those checks can be very broad, for example, or very high level. For example, is this a scanned document? To very, very fine grain check, for example, contrast checks at the individual character level. So there's a whole range of tests that we run the content through. We use WCAG AA as the sort of basis of our checklist, and then there's a number of items that we add from the Matterhorn protocol, and then a number of additional sort of checks that we've added ourselves, which mostly start to get at the sort of quality of course materials issue. And so we've got this broad range of checks that we run the content through, and then what we've also done is we've also developed a set of machine learning algorithms, and what they try to do is they try to extract some of the semantic information that's visually present to our eye, but isn't necessarily there in a machine readable way. And so what that means is that it'll do things like identify where the headings are, what the heading structure is, where the lists are, where the tables are, where the paragraphs are, where the mathematical formulas are, and so on. And then based on the output of the accessibility checklist and the machine learning algorithms, it'll automatically generate a number of alternative accessible formats for the content. So our kind of primary format is HTML, and so we generate something that we call a high quality semantic HTML version of the content. So we'll do things like convert the headings that we've identified into proper HTML heading tags, convert the lists into semantic HTML lists, convert the tables into semantic HTML tables. We automatically convert mathematical formulas into MathML, and so on. So we do a number of different things in order to generate that high quality semantic HTML version, and that version tends to work really well with screen reader users, for example. It tends to make the document much more navigable, much more readable, works really well for mobile purposes, for indexing purposes, and so on. And then based on the HTML version, we also generate a number of other alternative formats. So we generate an EPUB version of the content, we generate an audio version of the content, we generate an electronic braille version of the content, and so on. And then for certain types of content, we also generate other alternative accessible formats. For example, when we come across an untagged PDF, we will automatically generate a tagged version of that PDF using some of the semantic information that we've extracted. So this usually takes between 5 to 60 seconds for those alternative accessible formats to be generated after the original was added. And then at that point, we take all of those alternative accessible formats that we generated and we make them available to the student and the instructor within the learning management system. And so and this will become a little bit clearer once we dive into the demo, but the approach we take there is that is essentially that every time that, so we never replace the original, we always keep the original in place, but every time that the original can be accessed by a student or an instructor, there'll be a way for them to get to the alternative accessible formats as well. So that'll always be available next to it. Okay, so that's the first part of what Ally does. The second part of what it does is based on the accessibility checklist, based on the machine learning algorithms. There's also a feedback loop back to the instructor where we, within the context of the LMS, we provide them with some insight into how accessible their content is, how it affects people, as well as some guidance on different things they can do to improve the accessibility of their content, and then some like detailed step-by-step guides on how they can make some of those fixes. And that this instructor feedback loop has a number of different goals. There's a short-term goal in that if they engage with this, they generate a higher quality original right off the bat, which is useful for students straight away, allows us to generate higher quality alternative accessible formats straight away. But the real goal for this instructor feedback loop is to really try and generate a change in behavior over time, so that they can, next time when they prepare some new course content, they can actually make some of these things part of their workflow, and rather than having to revisit them after the fact. And so in the demo, you'll notice that we've got we use a pretty hands-off approach right now. So this instructor feedback loop we never sort of interrupt their usual workflows, but it's always there if they, it's always present and they can always engage with it. But we're sort of on a trajectory towards trying to find the right balance between maximizing instructor engagement and not pissing them off by telling them that their content isn't very good. So that's why we've got a very sort of hands-off approach right now, and we'll try to find the right balance over time there. So that's the second part of what Ally does. The last part of what it does is, so based on doing this across everything within your learning management system, there's also a feedback loop back to the institution, where we essentially generate an institutional report that will provide some really detailed insight into how you're doing from an institutional point of view in terms of the accessibility of your course content. So it'll tell you things like what content distribution are you dealing with, how accessible is it with and without the service, what are the most common issues, how are things evolving over time, what are the most problematic courses. There's a whole bunch of things that we show you in order to sort of provide a detailed insight and allow you to sort of identify, understand where the issues are, identify where additional things can be done, like organized training, who to address for that training, and so on. And it sounded like there was going to be a question. Or maybe not. That's fine. Yeah, so that's the institutional report. So that's the third part of what we do. So before we jump into a quick demo, are there any questions so far?
I know I've peppered you with a whole bunch of questions our first conversation. But does anybody else have anything at this point?
Sorry?
I know it may have already been answered, but you mentioned that, for example, if someone has a scanned PDF that's going up on the learning management system, does Ally actually have the OCR capability built into it to make that accessible, or does it just flag it and say this PDF is inaccessible?
It does both, actually. So when it detects a scanned PDF, it'll automatically run it through OCR, and we use an integration with Abby FineReader for that. But it'll also be flagged in the instructor feedback as this was a scanned document. You might want to consider making a digital copy of it available. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, your machine algorithms reminded me of Dolphin's conversion tool,
which I am not familiar with.
Yeah, they have a pretty nifty conversion tool that does a lot of the same thing that you're doing here.
Okay. Any other questions before we jump into the demo?
I'll ask a couple. Okay, so we have an original file that's available, then we have an accessible version. What if we would like to replace that original file with the accessible version and then flush it out to where it will be fully conformant with whatever guidelines we're using?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's something that's come up before too. So we currently don't do that yet. And so there's two things we can do there. We can, there's to what extent are we comfortable doing that automatically, and to what extent are we comfortable, or to what extent do we want to do it manually? And so in terms of doing that automatically, let's start off with that one. So that's the riskiest one in case we mess anything up. So there are some cases in which I think it would make sense to automatically replace the original with the, for example, with a scanned document, actually making, so doing an OCR version that has the same, that still has the images of the scans at the front, but has the text behind it. Automatically replacing the original with that version, I think would make a lot of sense. So that's something, for example, that we want to look into. And then making it possible for an instructor to indicate, or for someone to indicate that, okay, this alternative version looks fine. You can replace the original with it. That's something that's on our roadmap. It's actually not very hard to implement, and it's kind of what we already do when you go through the instructor feedback loop and upload a fixed version. So it's very similar in that sense. So that's something that that's on our roadmap and that we want to do fairly soon.
And in that process of replacing that file type, or are you providing an open edit method, or is it going to be ported into, for instance, the learning management systems authoring tool? How do you approach that?
In terms of reviewing the quality of a generated version?
Yeah, and then editing it and replacing it, because I see this more as a manual process at this point.
Yeah, so what we generate, so as I said, HTML is our primary format. So there's essentially two things that we can do there, we think. So we can have more of a lightweight process where the instructor can see what we've generated and just sort of indicate at a higher level of things like, okay, this was recognized as a title but wasn't the title, so just sort of click through things, which is more of a quicker way of working through it, which will also help us train our algorithms further. But then the other way is to actually throw it into a WYSIWYG editor, and what we generate is just standard HTML5. So that can just be thrown into a WYSIWYG editor, and at that point we could allow you to make changes to it and save those back into the alternative format.
So basically what possibly could happen, you have a higher level process of identifying those general items, and then we can toss it into a WYSIWYG editor for any more real in-depth process.
Yeah, that would be entirely possible, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? I know you guys are burning for some. Okay, why don't we, I'll save the rest of my questions for after the demo.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Thank you, Nick.
So let's jump into the demo. So the demo I'll be doing today will be with Instructure Canvas. The D2L integration will be very similar in terms of functionality. There might be some user interface bits that look a little bit different, just to make sure that it's in line with Brightspace's UI, but the general idea will be the same. So I'll go in. So the first thing I'll do is I'll actually sign in as an instructor, and I sort of have my fingers crossed that this will all be working today. There was a big Canvas upgrade, and it actually gave me a lot of stress just before this meeting because it actually broke something. But anyway, I think we've got it already, so fingers crossed. But if anything goes wrong, we'll blame it on them. So I'm going in as an instructor teaching this course, and so this is all native Instructure Canvas experience. We don't change anything there. Let's say, for example, we go into the files or the resources area, and this is where you'll start to see some of the things that we add in a pretty seamless way. But we'll get back to this in a bit. So the first thing I'll do is I'll actually add some course content. Let's maybe add this one. And this is an untagged PDF, pretty deliberately chosen because it's a pretty complex one too. And so added it to the course site, all again, standard sort of native LMS experience. But this is the point at which our service will pick up on it in the background. It will automatically generate. We'll check what type of content is this. We'll run it through the accessibility checklist. We'll run it through the machine learning algorithms. We'll generate those alternative accessible formats. We'll generate the instructor feedback, and we'll also add this item to the institutional report. And so before we dive into some of the details, let's go back out and go in as a student, just to show you what it looks like from a student point of view. And then we'll come back to the instructor in a bit. And so let's go into the files and resources area in this example, and then you'll. So the basic idea is that every time that the original is available, there will be a way to get to the accessible versions. And this is a little bit LMS specific, but so Canvas gives you a way in which you can get to some options in here. And so we add an accessible versions option there. When you go into the preview, you'll see an accessible versions in there. It's also not limited to just the files or resources area. So if you go into a wiki page or a module or an assignment or a discussion and any contents being used there, you'll get the you'll get the same experience. So it's pretty consistent across the entire LMS. And so again, it's the same way in which you can get to those accessible versions. So as I said, it's very invisible almost, but always there if you need and want it. So let's have a look at the original first to see what we're dealing with in this particular case. And so this is the original. It's an untagged PDF. It's actually a very complex one. It's got a pretty complex heading structure. It's got a 2-column layout, which doesn't read well on a screen reader. It's got a lot of complexity too. It's got a fair amount of figures, a lot of tables. There's a lot of mathematical formulas in there. There's a number of lists in there as well. It's pretty long in general. So this is, for those of you that have gone through the process of manually remediating content, this is something that would actually take a decent amount of time to work through and to sort of remediate and convert into alternative formats. So that's kind of what it looks like. So let's go and have a look at the accessible versions. So you'll see that we will provide you with a list of all of the accessible versions that we've generated. So in this particular case, we generated an HTML version, an audio version, an EPUB version, and an electronic braille version. So let's have a look at the HTML version first. Okay, so this is the HTML version. So you'll see that we've recognized the headings and converted the headings into proper HTML heading tags. We've recognized the paragraphs and put them into paragraph tags. Sort of recognized where the tables are, converted those to semantic HTML tables. And then you'll see that I'm having a problem with the MathML, but that's actually on our end. But so you should see that all of the mathematical formulas have been converted into MathML. It actually does a very good job at that. And then as I scroll through this, you'll see that it's pretty long. That there's some lists that have been recognized, some more tables, some additional tables. So it's made that available pretty quickly, and so that's a pretty dramatic difference in terms of turnaround time for them to get access to those alternative accessible formats. So that's the HTML version. Then, as I said, based on the HTML version, we generate a number of other versions. So for the audio version, we actually use an integration with Acapella. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Acapella, but it generates a very natural voice, which is easy to listen to. And we actually inject some of our semantic pointers into the audio so that we can indicate when something is a header or when something is a table, so that it becomes a little bit easier to listen to it and know where exactly you are in the document. And then we also generate an EPUB version from the content. So let's have a look at that. Which you can open in your favorite sort of EPUB or ebook reader. It's the same content with the same semantics and the same structure. It's just a different way for you to read through it and use some of the accessibility features available in EPUB. And then let's just scroll back. And then the last one is an electronic braille version, which is a format that you can run through an electronic embosser in this particular example. So that's a high-level overview of the first part of what we do, the alternative accessible formats. Let's now sign out and go back in as the instructor. Okay. Right. So as I said, we take a pretty hands-off approach here. So what we do is that every time that a piece of content is available, we will give an indication of how accessible that content item is, and then they can choose to engage with that. When they engage with it, it'll open up this sort of helper thing on the right-hand side, all within the context of the learning management system, and it will tell them how accessible that content is, what some of the issues are, how it affects people. It'll make some suggestions as to things that can be done to make it more accessible. And then if you want to sort of make one of these changes, then you can go in and we'll offer some step-by-step guidance on how you can make that change. And at the end of it, you can upload the fixed version. And we try and make this feedback as contextual as possible. Once you upload a fixed version, we will at that point replace the original with this fixed version, and then sort of regenerate the score, maybe provide some additional feedback based on the new version, and incorporate this into the report as well. The sort of basic idea for having it on sort of pop out on the right-hand side is that you can very easily work through all of them and make some changes to it. Again, the same as with the alternative accessible formats, not limited to just the files or the resources area, but if you have any content within a wiki page or a module or an assignment or a discussion, it'll pick up on those there as well. And so you'll get a similar indication, and then within the context of the tool you're working in, you'll get the feedback as well. So one thing I wanted to add to this is that, so as you see, so most of what we do right now is on an individual item basis. One thing that we're working on right now and actually making some really good progress on is providing a course level summary of this, which so that the instructor has access to a course level accessibility report almost. We're trying to make sure that even for instructors that aren't really familiar with accessibility, that still makes sense. And so it'll contain things like, these are the content items that you should look at fixing first because they affect most people, and so on. And so that's something that we're hoping to launch and announce very soon. So that's the second part of what Ally does, is the instructor feedback at a very high level. And then, so the last bit is the institutional report. So in order to get access to that, you need to access as sign in as an institutional administrator. And so the institutional report is is a standard LTI tool that can be added at the administrator level. And then, as I said, it shows you a number of different things. So you can look at how things are evolving over time. You can look at things by semester, by academic year, by month. And then when you look at things by semester or by term, we allow you to look forward by semester. So if any instructors have already started preparing their course for next semester, then we will report on that, and allows you to intervene before the course actually gets started. And then so for each of these time periods, we'll show you what sort of content distribution you're dealing with, how accessible it is with and without the service, what some of the issues are. We divide issues up into severe issues, major issues, and minor issues. And so to sort of help you understand what needs to be addressed first and what's kind of next after that. And then within the courses tab, you can also, this will essentially be a ranking of all of the courses ordered by those that are doing the worst. And so you can dive into every individual course, and it will show you data that's very similar. So it'll tell you what content distribution they have, how accessible it is with and without the service, and what some of the issues are. One of the things that we'll be launching very, very soon, hopefully early next week, is the ability to sort of, both here and within the general overview, is to click through on every individual issue and then see a list of all of the courses where that issue exists, and then be able to drill down into that and see all of the files that have actually failed that check or violate that issue. So that's something that we'll be launching early next week. And so the basic point of this institutional report is to try and provide as much insight as possible to allow you to see how things are going, how things are evolving, where the issues are, sort of track, as I said, track how things are evolving, and allow you to identify where maybe additional training could be provided or other things could be done. And so that's the institutional report at a high level. So just to summarize before we jump into what I'm sure will be lots of questions. So Ally has 3 major feature areas. There's the alternative accessible formats that are automatically generated and made available to students and instructors. There's the instructor feedback loop, which will provide them with insight and guidance on how to make their content more accessible. And then there's the institutional report, which sort of provides that institutional overview of how you're doing in terms of the accessibility of your course content. And so the way in which we think about the accessibility of course content is almost as a continuum, and as an institution you sort of land at a certain point on that continuum, and for most institutions that's usually pretty far down, and then everything we do is essentially to try and bring you up on that continuum as much as possible. So first of all, there's the alternative accessible formats that we automatically generate, which automatically brings you up on that continuum quite a bit. And then in order to sort of help close that remaining gap, that's where that's where you do need some engagement from both the instructor and the institution. And so first of all, that's where the instructor feedback comes in, brings you up a little bit further on that spectrum, on that continuum. And then the institutional report is essentially there to sort of oversee this entire process. It's sort of, and get a sense of where you are on that continuum, and also help you identify what else can be done to sort of help sort of close that remaining gap. So that's kind of how all of those features work together, and how they try to move you up on that continuum. And then that's actually most of what I wanted to run through. One last thing that I'll add is that we are offering pilots free of charge for 3 to 6 months. So as I said, the first D2L pilots will be kicking off at the end of the fall semester. So if anyone would be interested in that, we can definitely get that scheduled if you're interested. And then I'll open it up to questions and comments, concerns, anything else.
Nicholas, this is Christopher with Georgia Tech, and excellent presentation. I appreciate it. Just a couple of questions. Well, first of all, not one specific question is we'd be very interested in participating in a pilot, and if that's open. You said it's opened in beginning of fall, in the fall.
So would that be a D2L pilot or a different learning management system?
It would be a D2L pilot.
Yeah. So that would be end of fall.
Okay, so that's one thing. That's great. Is there size regarding the alternative media, the post production of it? Is there a size limitation to the files being uploaded?
No, so we don't impose a file limit. So what happens is when we so the original file always lives in the LMS, and then at that point we pick up on it, and we're a cloud hosted service. So we're hosted in Amazon Web Services, and then at that point we pick up on it, we process it. Most of those files are very reasonable in size. I think the audio format is the one that tends to get the biggest. And so what we do is we store those alternative accessible formats by default on our servers, because so our preference here. So there's three options. So by default we store them on our end in S3. There's a configuration option that would allow you to store them in an S3 bucket that your institution controls. We don't have any institutions doing that yet, but that's an option. And then what we ideally want to get to over time is to have a way in which we can actually push the alternative accessible formats back into the LMS. We don't really have an interest in hosting those files and the storage costs associated to those. So that would be our ideal solution. Right now we don't do that, because if we push something back, that'll contribute to your storage quota, and we don't want that to happen. But we're, as part of our partnerships with the different LMS vendors, we're sort of trying to get them to provide a way in which we can push it back without contributing to your storage quota.
Okay, thank you. Just another question: have you worked with any library systems and integrating to the LMS systems?
So we haven't worked with any libraries in terms of integrating with the LMS systems, but we are working with a few libraries around integrating into things like open access platforms, where especially places that have a lot of PDFs, for example, to process or make available as part of an open access systems are those places are very interested in what Ally does, and so we are working with them.
Okay, and going back to the alt media again, the EPUBs, the conversion to EPUBs, is there EPUB 2, 3, or is it what type of EPUB are you converting to?
It's EPUB 3. I think. I will confirm that with one of our technical people, but I'm pretty sure it's EPUB 3.
All right. Great.
Hi, this is Ron Dutton at AMAC. My question is, how do you deal with alternate text or the lack of alternate text?
So the lack of alternate text for images, there's two things that we do. So first of all, I mean, obviously there's not much that we can automatically do, except for one thing that we do, which is, so when we detect an image that doesn't have an alternative description, then we actually do a reverse image search on the internet, I guess, and we we see if there's anything that we can find there that we can at least suggest as a default. Results they can be surprisingly good, but they aren't always appropriate within the context of where the image is being used. So that's kind of used as a last resort fallback option, I guess. But the main thing we do with the lack of alternative descriptions is just flag it in the instructor feedback, and just make it something that we try to get the instructors to do through our instructor feedback loop.
Okay, thank you.
And this is one of the, like when Philip was asking about how can we allow people to sort of edit the alternative versions that we generate. This would be one example where either throwing it within a WYSIWYG editor would make it easy to add an alternative accessible form to add a description, but we could probably make that even more lightweight and just allow them to, show them what the version looks like and just allow them to click on it and just enter the description. And so we could probably make that sort of part of it fairly lightweight. And so there's lots of ideas that we have there and would like to do.
So this is Christopher again. So it just kind of jumping off of Ron's question, alt text it can be very subjective in a sense. So
yep.
Even for obviously the faculty. So what is there training built in? You mentioned training earlier, or at least feedback to the instructor. Talk a little bit about kind of the.
Yeah, so when they look at the instructor feedback for an image, for example, then one of the things the first thing they'll see if there is no alternative text available for that image is that we'll ask them to add one, and then now we've got a whole bunch of sort of pointers around things that they should and should not do in that, and we're working very hard. We've got some educational people on the team as well. We're working very hard to try to make that as light but complete as possible.
Great, thank you.
Hey, this is Ed up at Tennessee Tech. I've got a question about, let's say you have a course that has already been, completed. You've got syllabi, you've got documents that are up on that course. Mm-hmm. And, how do you, I know, for example, D2L has that copy feature where you can just copy, one course into another. Mm-hmm. Does Ally run in the background to check the courses? Let's say, we got in and did a trial this fall. Would it check the documents that are already up there, or does it catch it on an as uploaded basis?
So when the Ally integration is enabled for the first time, by default, it will actually go through all of the historical content as well. And so we primarily do that for report generation purposes, so that we can provide a very complete report that will show you how things have been evolving over the last few years, I guess, depending on how long you've been using the LMS. So by default, it'll actually go back in time and it'll process all of those things. It'll make those available as well. There is a way for you to disable that. Or limit it to just a specific semester or a specific set of courses. So that can be disabled if need be, but by default it'll go back in time and do all of that processing.
Great, thanks.
And just to give you an idea, I think the biggest one that the biggest individual institution that we've done so far is Utah State University, where we sort of processed back up until 2011, and there was over 9 million content items. So just to give you an example of the scale that we should be able to deal with.
Wow, thank you.
Anyone else?
I've got kind of an offhanded question. This is not so much with learning management systems, but I'm wondering, have you played around with content management systems like Drupal? Or Joomla?
Yeah, we have those very high on our priority list in terms of next types of platforms that we want to integrate with. I think those sorts of platforms, it would make a ton of sense for Ally to integrate into. We can do something very similar there. We can have those alternative accessible formats available. We can provide that feedback to all users. Essentially, we don't have to limit it to instructors. And then we can generate a report there as well. And then I think it starts to become really interesting, where you can also look at potentially combined reports across all of the different systems that the people at your institution are using. And so, yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely. We haven't gotten there yet, but it's very high up on our wish list.
And you're out of Cambridge, you said, right? So you're an organization that has transitioned out to like technology transfer, or is it separate?
Sort of, not really. I mean, we're kind of a spin-off, but not entirely. So, so many of us have worked at Cambridge University as sort of in educational technology and various open source projects, and then we sort of, I guess, we kind of spun out of that, but not Ally only. Ally was only created a while after that happened, but we all have some sort of connection to Cambridge University. That's right.
So do you have any plans, like you talked about, having kind of a research component from the back end of this, where you're actually looking at, with approval, obviously running through IOB or whatever needs to be done, but looking at it from across the different institutions and what's going on and for publications and so on, because I think this could be really beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if anyone would be interested in sort of, I mean, so we already have a number of like institutional reports that go back years in terms of all of the content that they have. And there's some very, very interesting trends in there. We're even seeing differences between how accessible your course content is on average, depending on which vendor you actually go with or which LMS you go with. There's institutions that we see that are improving significantly over the year. There's institutions that are actually decreasing in terms of how accessible they are. And so there's so much really interesting data there. And absolutely, we do want to we do want to do something with that. There's a lot of interesting insights in that. There's a lot that we can learn from it. And there's actually, I mean, and to be honest, every time that an institution sees their report, it generates awareness as well, and sometimes even panic. And I think that's a good thing. And so there's a lot of interesting data there. We absolutely want to use it to either blog about it or create publications from it. And I think if others would be interested in contributing to that, then we can definitely have that conversation.
But yeah, because when you first start showing kind of the feedback for the instructors, it seemed kind of siloed, and I started thinking, okay, so how does the administrator actually link with the faculty? Is there any kind of, you're teaching the faculty, but you're teaching the faculty as as a whole, or lessons learned and bringing it back to the campus as a whole. So, having that feedback is excellent. What faculty will do with it is a whole other question, but
right.
I think it's a pretty powerful tool. So give me just an idea of who is the perfect administrator. I mean, what level of technical abilities do they need to have? Are they more of a content manager? That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think another thing that we can get out of this is what's an ideal institution too. There are very when we sort of look at the reports, we can very often sort of correlate it back to some of the initiatives at the institution and who's involved and whether or not there's someone that sort of owns the problem and drives it. And so there's a whole bunch of things around what should an institution ideally do around the accessibility of course content as well that I think we can provide some insight into. And what's effective. Yeah.
All right, anyone else with any more questions?
Philip, this is David. We weren't able to get into the Zoom, but you are recording and you'll send out a link.
Absolutely.
Yes, Nicholas will get that to me.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Philip. This is Holly-Anna at Chat State. This looks great, and we would be interested in taking part in the pilot when it's available.
Nicola, you have any questions?
Well, I was just going to say we would love to have you participate. I think if you have an interest in participating in a pilot, I think this would be this would be a good time to express that interest so that we can include you with that initial group, because we won't do an infinite number of them. So if you're interested, this would be a good time to this or in the next few weeks / month would be a good time to make sure that you're included.
Nicholas, I'd like to talk about that here in a second with Christopher on the line. Nicola, did you have a question?
Oh, I think we would definitely be interested in the idea of a pilot, and particularly the data that we could collect from that.
This is David White at Walter State. We would be interested in a pilot also.
This is Ed up at Tech. We would be interested in a pilot as well. I do have a quick question. Is this just to be used with like learning management systems, or could this be used with websites as well, like a certain domain?
Yeah, so websites is one of the sort of types of integrations that we want to get to. So right now it's just limited to learning management systems, but over time, going forward, we want to provide those integrations with library systems, with general websites, with content collaboration platforms, and so on. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Christopher, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Nicholas, Christopher and I have been working on an initiative, and specifically, we're really looking at this particular product because we, of course, both are using D2L. And this would be, I think, a fantastic opportunity for us to begin to build a foundation for that. And I know that we'd be definitely interested in dealing with a pilot. Now, I would like to see this pilot possibly, and Christopher, tell me what you think, of this being built out to a 6-month process. Because, Nicholas, what I would like to see, and we've had this conversation earlier, is system-level reporting, up to system-level health reporting, as well as the ability to have light editing as well as insertion into the editor itself within the LMS, so we can manage those files and those new files in the conversion process, and all the robust pieces, especially that come along with description of specific visual aids. And I think this is the opportunity where we can really flesh that out. I've already talked with Jana and Paul Jansen at D2L as well, and they're really interested in hearing about this process. And so whomever you're speaking with too, there's a couple of other individuals that really want to see something happen with this too.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that sounds really good to me. I think sort of stretching it out to a 6-month period is definitely something that we'd be very happy to contemplate, and then working together to make that happen. And as I said before, we are working very closely with Jamie and the California community colleges, and system level reporting is very important for them as well. So we will. I think that will fit in very nicely in terms of the work that we do for them as well. So yeah, absolutely. And I mean, at that point, we can actually, there will be data to actually start to compare different systems as well, and that data becomes really, really interesting and valuable.
This is David White. I'm sorry to ask the question now. I should have asked it earlier. On the institutional report, does it drill down to the active teaching course level?
So, sorry, can you repeat the question?
On the institutional report, is that by course or just an amalgamation, a summary across all courses delivered at the institution?
So it's both. So in the sort of overview report, you can look at things by semester or by year or by month, and then so for those different time periods, it'll actually be. So for example, when you look at things by semester, then it'll be averaged by every semester. But then you can dive deeper into that and get a full list of all of the courses in that semester, for example, and then dive into every course individually. So you can do things like, give me all of the courses from the current semester, and then you can sort of drill into every single course there and see how they're doing, what the issues are, and so on. So it goes from very high level overview and a lot of averaging to being able to drill down into the individual course level.
This is Nicola. I have a question. So we at TNE Campus, we work on a master course model. So we have a single master course from which all of our sections are copied.
Okay.
So if we were to, say, run Ally in the master, and all the alternate versions are created and everything is linked, would that carry over when the course is cloned as part of the course files, or would it have to be run through Ally again?
It would actually be carried over. So a little bit of, so the way in which we technically do things behind the scenes is that when we try to process some content, we will actually check if we've ever processed it before. And then if we have, we will just use the results from the previous processing. So when you apply it to your master course, we will do the processing there. And then every time that it's copied or cloned, Ally will automatically detect that, okay, this is the same as the content that was in the master course. So and it will basically link to the same items. And then if anything's changed in the cloned course or anything else is added, that'll be processed as well. So it'll carry over.
Okay.
Hey, Christopher, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. So in dealing with this particular opportunity, I know what our conversations have been, and I think this is a great opportunity where we can really match up what we're trying to get accomplished. At the same time, I've also talked with D2L about dealing with TinyMCE and building it out to ATAG standards.
Yep.
To provide us with the WYSIWYG interface to where our instructors have an easier means of being able to meet the conformance standards. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity to work with both D2L and Ally to build out a model that could hopefully in the future then provide us with the capability of not only capturing the reporting and the usability and those pieces that we can then report out and then hopefully port back in to, for instance, our training courses for our staff and faculty, but then also inform the process of those tools that are most needed and hopefully then get them to the point of where they're completely there within the editing module as well. So that's the component that I'm most concerned about, is that customization and the ability. I like the light piece, but at the same time, I know that there are pieces of this that's just not going to work unless something really becomes massively robust. But with that, I'd like to get some of your comment and your position on this.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, as I previously indicated, I think we'd be very happy to be sort of be part of that three-way collaboration with D2L, including the WYSIWYG editor bits as well. I think that'd be very valuable. One of the I think I might have told you this last time too, but one of the things that we want to do is we also want to act we also want to do lobbying with some of these vendors and point them, because we can sort of look at things at across many different institutions. We can sort of point out what the main accessibility issues are in those different platforms and use that to apply pressure on those vendors. So that is absolutely a conversation that we'd be happy to have. And to be completely honest, the ideal that we're shooting for is that some of these things just become part of the native LMS rather than us having to add it on top of it. And that is absolutely our ideal. I think if we put ourselves out of business in 5 years' time, then we've done a terrific job.
So, Christopher?
Yeah, I mean, you and I could probably have further discussions tomorrow when we meet, but I would be very open. Everything that you said, I agree with, and I feel like it would be a nice collaboration if we could work with Ally and get D2L on track with them. And Nikolai, you said it's 6 months, right? That's what I'm hearing, is that you need 6 months to really get D2L in place.
Well, it wouldn't be another. It's only 4 months from now until that pilot would kick off, and then at that point, a pilot could get started. We'd be happy to do a 6-month pilot instead of a 3-month pilot. I think that would be fine. And so that's roughly the timeline that we're looking at.
Anyone else? I have a couple more questions here in a second, but I want to give all sorts of other people opportunity.
This is David White. Especially for those of us who, we are a small community college in East Tennessee, what would be important to me in the pilot would be for us to continue conference calls like we did with the pilot for Insights that Hollyana led.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to ask a different question entirely. Have you considered anything like UDL standards and how that potentially can incorporate in dealing with machine algorithms or algorithms?
We have not. So what exactly are you referring to?
Some of the CAS standards.
Oh, universal design.
I know a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah, not yet. But if you want to point me towards what you think would be very valuable for us to incorporate, then we'd definitely be happy to have a look at that.
Okay, I just wanted to put that as an aside because I think that's a huge topic of helping the process, because I only look at access as one foundation piece of actual usability.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So, and I think there's some of those pieces that might actually be machine accessible, but past that, you know, then the rest of it's very, should I say, maybe subjective.
Right.
Okay, that was my other oddball question that I wanted to ask you. Wow. Everybody done? No other questions?
Lots of things to think about.
Right.
Yep.
Sounds
we'll
good.
have this recorded so we can all sit down and watch it at our leisure if we wish.
Well, I'll make it available on
Nicholas, I really appreciate this. I'm sorry, say that again?
No, I said I'll make it available on Netflix as well. It's
Awesome. Yeah, so do you know how soon you can get that link out?
Yes, I'll press the stop button and then I should be able to send over the link later today.
Excellent. Okay. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. Christopher, I know we can talk some more tomorrow when we meet. And really, I don't have a whole lot more to say at this point. I think it's really the issue is actually going through development and seeing how we can get it all integrated with partners at the table.
Mm-hmm. All right, perfect. Okay, well, thanks everyone for your time. Really good questions. I will send out the link to the recording. If any other questions come up, feel free to reach out. We can always set up another call as well if necessary. And then I think we'll be in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Cool,
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you for leading and setting it up.
Yep. Thank
See you guys.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.